They ate the last of the ham and cheese that Wolf had filched from Faldor's pantry, and then spread their blankets on the ground beneath the wagons. The ground was hard and cold, but the exciting sense of being on some great adventure helped Geryon to endure the discomfort. The next morning, however, it began to rain. It was a fine, misty rain at first, scattering before the wind, but as the morning wore on, it settled into a steady drizzle. The musty smell of the turnips in their wet sacks became stronger, and Geryon huddled miserably with his cloak pulled tightly around him. The adventure was growing much less exciting. The road became muddy and slick, and the horses struggled their way up each hill and had to be rested often. On the first day, they had covered 8 leagues. After that, they were lucky to make 5. Aunt Poll became waspish and short-tempered. "This is idiocy," she said to Mr. Wolf about noon of the 3rd day.
"Everything is idiocy, if you choose to look at it in the proper light," he replied philosophically.
"Why, wagoneers? There are faster ways to travel, a wealthy family and a proper carriage, for instance, or imperial messengers on good horses. Either way would have put us in Darin by now."
"And left a trail in the memories of all these simple people that we have passed so wide that even a Tull could follow it," the wolf explained. "Brill has long since reported our departure to his employers. Every Murgle in Cindaria is looking for us by now."
"Why are we hiding from the Murgos, Mr. Wolf?" Geryon asked, hesitant to interrupt, but impelled by curiosity to try to penetrate the mystery behind their flight. "Aren't they just merchants? Like the Tolnedrans and the Drasnians?"
"The Murgos have no real interest in trade," the wolf explained. "Nadraks are merchants, but the Murgos are warriors. The Murgos pose as merchants for the same reason that we pose as wagoneers, so that they can move about more or less undetected. If you simply assumed that all Murgos are spies, you would not be too far from the truth."
"Haven't you anything better to do than ask all of these questions?" Aunt Poll asked. "Not really," Geryon said, and then instantly knew that he had made a mistake. "Good. In the back of Beric's wagon you will find the dirty dishes from the morning's meal. You will also find a bucket. Fetch the bucket and run to that stream ahead for water, and then return to Beric's wagon and wash the dishes." "In cold water? Now, Geryon?" Grumbling, he climbed down off of the slowly moving wagon. In the late afternoon of the 4th day, they came over a high hilltop and saw below the city of Darin, and beyond the city the leaden-gray sky. Geryon caught his breath. To his eyes, the city looked very large. Its surrounding walls were thick and high, and there were more buildings within those walls than he had seen in all of his life. But it was to the sea that his eyes were drawn. There was a sharp tang to the air. Faint hints of that smell had been coming to him on the wind for the past league or so, but now, inhaling deeply, he breathed in the perfume of the sea for the first time in his life. His spirit soared. "Finally," Aunt Poll said. Silk had stopped the lead wagon and came walking back. His head was pulled back slightly, and the rain ran down his long nose to drip from its pointed tip. "Do we stop here, or go on down to the city?" "We go to the city," Aunt Poll said. "I am not going to sleep under a wagon when there are inns so close at hand."
"Honest wagoners would seek out an inn."
"And a warm tap-room," Mr. Wolf agreed. "I might have guessed that."
"We have to try to look the part," the wolf shrugged.
They went on down the hill, the horses' hooves slipping and sliding as they braced back against the weight of the wagons. At the city gate, 2 watchmen in stained tunics and wearing rust-spotted helmets came out of the tiny watch-house just inside the gate. "What's your business in Darin?" one of them asked Silk.
"I am Ambar of Koto," Silk lied pleasantly.
a poor Drasnian merchant hoping to do business in your splendid city."
"Splendid,"
one of the watchmen snorted.
"What have you in the wagons, merchant?"
the other inquired. "Turnips," Silk said deprecatingly. "My family has been in the spice trade for generations, but I am reduced to peddling turnips." He sighed then. "Ah, the world is a topsy-turvy place, is it not, good friend?"
"We're obliged to inspect the wagons," the watchman said. "It'll take some time, I'm afraid."
"And a wet time at that," Silk said, squinting up into the rain. "Oh, it would be much more pleasant to devote the time to wetting one's inside in some friendly tavern."
"That's difficult when one doesn't have much money," the watchman suggested hopefully.
"I would be more than pleased if you would accept some small token of friendship from me to aid you in your wetting," Silk offered.
"You're most kind," the watchman replied with a slight bow.
Some coins changed hands, and the wagons moved on into the city uninspected. From the hilltop, Darin had looked quite splendid, but Geryon found it much less so as they clattered through the wet streets. The buildings all seemed the same, with a kind of self-important aloofness about them, and the streets were littered and dirty. The salt tang of the sea was tainted here with the smell of dead fish, and the faces of the people hurrying alone were grim and unfriendly. Geryon's first excitement began to fade. "Why are the people all so unhappy?" he asked Mr. Wolf.
"They have a stern and demanding god," the wolf replied.
"Which god is that?"
"Money. Money is a worse god than Torak himself."
"Don't fill the boy's head with nonsense," Aunt Paul said. "The people aren't really unhappy, Geryon. They're just all in a hurry. They have important affairs to attend to, and they are afraid that they shall be late, that's all." "I don't think I'd like to live here. Seems like a bleak, unfriendly kind of a place. Sometimes I wish we were all back at Faldor's farm."
"There are worse places than Faldor's,"
Wolf agreed. The inn Silk chose for them was near the docks, and the smell of the sea and the rank detritus of the meeting of the sea and the land was strong here. The inn, however, was a stout building with stables attached and storage sheds for the wagons. Like most inns, the main floor was given over to the kitchen, and the large common room with its rows of tables and large fireplaces. The upper floors provided sleeping chambers for the guests. "It's a suitable place," Silk announced as he came back out to the wagons after speaking at some length with the innkeeper. "The kitchen seems clean, and I didn't see any bugs when I inspected the sleeping chambers." "I'll inspect it," Aunt Paul said, climbing down from the wagon.
"Oh, as you wish, great lady,"
Silk said with a polite bow. Aunt Paul's inspection took much longer than Silk's, and it was nearly dark when she returned to the courtyard. "Adequate," she sniffed, "but only barely."
"It's not as if we plan to settle in for the winter, Paul. At most, we'll only be here for a few days," said Wolf.
She ignored that.
"I have ordered hot water sent up to our chambers. I will take the boy up and wash him, while you and the others see to the wagons and horses.
Come along, Geryon." And she turned and went back into the inn. Geryon wished fervently that they would all stop referring to him as the boy. He did, after all, he reflected, have a name, and it was not that difficult a name to remember. He was gloomily convinced that even if he lived to have a long gray beard, they would still speak of him as the boy. After the horses and wagons had been attended to, and they had all washed up, they went down again to the common room and dined. The meal certainly did not match up to Aunt Paul's, but it was a welcome change from turnips. Geryon was absolutely certain that he would never be able to look a turnip in the face again for the rest of his life. After they had eaten, the men loitered over their ale pots, and Aunt Paul's face registered her disapproval.
Geryon and I are going up to bed now. Try not to fall down too many times when you come up."
Wolf, Beric, and Silk laughed at that, but Jernik, Geryon thought, looked a bit shamefaced. The next day, Mr. Wolf and Silk left the inn early and were gone all day. Geryon had positioned himself in a strategic place in hopes that he might be noticed and asked to go along. But he was not. So when Dernek went down to look after the horses, he accompanied him instead.
"Dernek,"
he said, after they had fed and watered the animals, and the smith was examining their hooves for cuts or stone bruises,
"does all this seem strange to you?"
Dernek carefully lowered the leg of the patient horse he was checking.
"All of what, Geryon?"
he asked, his plain face sober.
"Well, everything," Geryon said rather vaguely. "This journey, Barak, Silk, Mr. Wolf, Aunt Paul, all of it. They all talk sometimes when they don't think I can hear them. This all seems terribly important, but I can't tell if we're running away from someone or looking for something."
"It's confusing to me as well, Geryon," Dernek admitted. "Many things aren't what they seem. Not what they seem at all."
"Does Aunt Paul seem different to you? What I mean is, they all treat her as if she were a noblewoman or something, and she acts differently, too, now that we're away from Faldor's farm."
"Mistress Paul's a great lady," Dernek said. "I've always known that."
His voice had that same respectful tone it always had when he spoke of her, and Geryon knew that it was useless to try to make Dernek perceive anything unusual about her.
"And Mr. Wolf," Geryon said, trying another tack, "I always thought he was just an old storyteller."
"He doesn't seem to be an ordinary vagabond," Dernek admitted. "I think we've fallen in with important people, Geryon, on important business. It's probably better for simple folk such as you and I not to ask too many questions, but to keep our eyes and ears open."
"Will you be going back to Faldor's farm when this is all over?"
Geryon asked carefully. Dernek considered that, looking out across the rain-swept courtyard of the inn.
"No,"
he said finally, in a soft voice.
"I'll follow as long as Mistress Paul allows me to."
On an impulse, Geryon reached out and patted the smith's shoulder.
"Everything's going to turn out for the best, Dernek."
Dernek sighed.
Let's hope so."
He turned his attention back to the horses.
"Dernek," Geryon asked, "did you know my parents?"
"No,"
Dernek said.
"The first time I saw you, you were a baby in the Mistress Paul's arms."
"What was she like then?"
"She seemed angry. I don't think I've ever seen anyone quite so angry. She talked with Faldor for a while and went into work in the kitchen. You know Faldor. He never turned anyone away in his whole life. At first she was just a helper, but that didn't last too long. Our old cook was getting fat and lazy, and she finally went off to live with her youngest daughter. After that, Mistress Paul ran the kitchen."
"She was a lot younger then, wasn't she?"
"No," Dernek said thoughtfully. "Mistress Paul never changes. She looks exactly the same way now as she did that first day."
"I'm sure it only seems that way. Everybody gets older."
"Not Mistress Paul," Dernek said.
That evening, Wolf and his sharp-nosed friend returned, their faces somber.
"Nothing,"
the wolf announced shortly, scratching at his snowy beard.
"Well, I might have told you that,"
Aunt Paul sniffed. Wolf gave her an irritated look and then shrugged.
"Well, he had to be certain."
The red-bearded giant, Barak, looking up from the mail shirt he was polishing, said,
"No trace at all?"
"Not a hint. He hasn't gone through here."
"Where now, then?"
Beric asked, setting his mail shirt aside.
"Miras,"
the wolf said. Beric rose and went to the window.
"The rain's slacking, but the roads are going to be difficult."
"We won't be able to leave tomorrow anyway," Silk said, lounging on a stool near the door. "I have to dispose of our turnips. If we carry them out of Derryn with us, it will seem curious, and we don't want to be remembered by anyone who might have occasion to talk to any wandering Murgo."
"I suppose you're right. I hate to lose the time, though. But there's no help for it,"
said the wolf. "The roads will be better after a day's drying," Silk pointed out, "and wagons travel faster empty."
"Are you sure you can sell them, friend Silk?"
Dernick asked. "I'm a Drasnian," Silk replied confidently. "I can sell anything. We might even make a good profit."
"Don't worry about that. The turnips have served their purpose. All we need to do now is to get rid of them."
"It is a matter of principle," Silk said airily. "Besides, if I don't try to strike a hard bargain, that would be remembered too. Oh, don't be concerned. The business won't take long and won't delay us." "Could I go along with you, Silk?" Garion asked hopefully. "I haven't seen any part of the city except for this inn." Silk looked inquiringly at Aunt Pole. She considered for a moment. "I don't suppose it would do any harm," she said. "And it will give me time to attend to some things." The next morning after breakfast, Silk and Garion set out with Garion carrying a bag of turnips. The small man seemed to be in extraordinarily good spirits, and his long pointed nose seemed almost to quiver. "The whole point," he said, as they walked along the littered cobblestone streets, "is not to appear too eager to sell, and to know the market, of course." "That sounds reasonable," Garion said politely. "Yesterday I made a few inquiries. Turnips are selling on the docks of Koto and Drasnia for a Drasnian silver link per hundredweight." "Oh, what?" "It's a Drasnian coin. About the same as a silver imperial. Not quite, but close enough. The merchant will try to buy our turnips for no more than a quarter of that, but he will go as high as half." "How do you know that?" "It's customary." "How many turnips do we have?" Garion asked, stepping around a pile of refuse in the street. 30 hundredweight. "That would be—" Garion's face contorted in an effort to make the complex calculation in his head. 15 imperials, Silk supplied, or 3 gold crowns. "Gold?" Garion asked. Because gold coins were so rare in country dealings, the word seemed to have an almost magic quality. Silk nodded. "It's always preferable. Easier to carry. The weight of silver becomes burdensome." "And how much did we pay for the turnips?" 5 imperials, Silk said. "The farmer gets 5, we get 15, and the merchant gets 30? Garion asked incredulously. "Well, that hardly seems fair." Silk shrugged. "It's the way things are. There's the merchant's house." He pointed at a rather imposing building with broad steps. "When we go in, he will pretend to be very busy and not at all interested in us. Later, while he and I are bargaining, he'll notice you and tell you what a splendid boy you are." "Me?" "Oh, he'll think that you're some relation of mine, a son or nephew, perhaps, and he will think to gain advantage over me by flattering you." "What a strange notion." "I'll tell him many things," Silk went on, talking very rapidly now, his eyes seeming to glitter, and his nose was actually twitching. "Pay no attention to what I say, and don't let any surprise show on your face. He'll be watching us both very closely." "You're going to lie?" "Oh, it's expected." "Oh, he will lie too. The one of us who lies the best will get the better of the bargain." "It all seems terribly involved." "Oh, it's a game," Silk said, his ferret-like face breaking into a grin. A very exciting game that's played all over the world. Good players get rich and bad players don't. Are you a good player? Oh, I'm one of the best, Silk replied modestly. Let's go in. And he led Geryon up the broad steps to the merchant's house. The merchant wore an unbelted, fur-trimmed gown of a pale green color and a close-fitting cap. He behaved much as Silk had predicted, sitting before a plain table and leafing through many scraps of parchment with a busy frown on his face while Silk and Geryon waited for him to notice them.
Very well, then, he said finally. You have business with me?
We have some turnips, Silk said somewhat deprecatingly.
That's truly unfortunate, friend, the merchant said, assuming a long face. The wharves at Kotu groan with turnips just now. It'd hardly pay me to take 'em off your hands at any price.
Silk shrugged. Perhaps the Carricks or the Algas, then. Their markets may not yet be as glutted as yours. He turned. Come along, boy, he said to Geryon.
A moment, good friend. I detect from your speech that you and I are countrymen. Perhaps as a favor, I'll take a look at your turnips.
Your time's valuable, Silk said. If you aren't in the market for turnips, why should we trouble you further?
I might still be able to find a buyer somewhere, the merchant protested, if the merchandise is of good quality.
He took the bag from Geryon and opened it. Geryon listened with fascination as Silk and the merchant fenced politely with each other, each attempting to gain the advantage.
What a splendid boy this is, the merchant said,
suddenly seeming to notice Geryon for the first time. An orphan, placed in my care. I'm attempting to teach him the rudiments of business, but he's slow to learn.
Oh,
the merchant said, sounding slightly disappointed. Then Silk made a curious gesture with the fingers of his right hand. The merchant's eyes widened slightly, then he too gestured. After that, Geryon had no idea of what was going on. The hands of Silk and the merchant wove intricate designs in the air, sometimes flickering so rapidly that the eye could scarce follow them. Silk's long, slender fingers seemed to dance, and the merchant's eyes were fixed upon them, his forehead breaking into a sweat at the intensity of his concentration. Done, then? Silk said finally, breaking the long silence in the room.
Done,
the merchant agreed somewhat ruefully. It's always a pleasure doing business with an honest man.
I've learned much today, the merchant said. I hope you don't intend to remain in this business for long, friend. If you do, I might just as well give you keys to my warehouse and my strong room right now and save myself the anguish that I would experience every time you appear.
Silk laughed. You have been a worthy opponent, friend merchant.
I thought so at first, the merchant said, shaking his head. But I'm no match for you. Deliver your turnips to my warehouse on Bedek Wharf tomorrow morning.
He scratched a few lines on a piece of parchment with a quill.
My overseer will pay you.
Silk bowed and took the parchment. Come along, boy, he said to Geryon, and led the way from the room. What happened? Geryon asked, when they were outside in the blustery street. We got the price I wanted, Silk said somewhat smugly. But you didn't say anything. Oh, we spoke at great length, Geryon. Weren't you watching? All I saw was the two of you wiggling your fingers at each other. That's how we spoke. It's a separate language my countrymen devised thousands of years ago. It's called the secret language, and it's much faster than the spoken one. It also permits us to speak in the presence of strangers without being overheard. An adept can conduct business while discussing the weather, if he chooses. Will you teach it to me? Geryon asked, fascinated. It takes a long time to learn. Well, isn't the trip to Muras likely to take a long time? Silk shrugged. As you wish. It won't be easy, but it will help to pass the time, I suppose. Are we going back to the inn now?
Not right away. We'll need a cargo to explain our entry into Muros. I thought we were going to leave with the wagons empty. We are. But you just said, we'll see a merchant that I know. He buys farm goods all over Sindaria and has them held on the farms until the markets are right in Orendia and Tolnedra, and then he arranges to have them freighted either to Muros or Kamar. It sounds very complicated, Geryon said doubtfully.
It's not really, Silk assured him. Come along, my boy, you'll see.
The merchant was a Tolnedran, who wore a flowing blue robe and a disdainful expression on his face. He was talking with a grim-faced Murgo, as Silk and Geryon entered his counting room. The Murgo, like all of his race Geryon had ever seen, had deep scars on his face, and his black eyes were penetrating. Silk touched Geryon's shoulder with a cautionary hand when they entered, and saw the Murgo. Then he stepped forward.
"Forgive me, noble merchant," he said ingratiatingly. "I didn't know you were occupied. My porter and I will wait outside until you have time for us."
"My friend and I will be busy for most of the day," the Tolnedran said. "Is it something important?"
"I was just wondering if you might have a cargo for me," Silk replied.
"No," the Tolnedran said shortly. "Nothing."
He started to turn back to the Murgo, then stopped and looked sharply at Silk. "Aren't you Ambar of Kotu? I thought you dealt in spices." Geryon recognized the name Silk had given the watchmen at the gates of the city. It was evident that the little man had used the name before. "Alas," Silk sighed, "my last venture lies at the bottom of the sea, just off the hook of Arindia. 2 full shiploads bound for Tolhanath, a sudden storm, and I'm a pauper."
"A tragic tale worthy Ambar," the Tolnedran master merchant said somewhat smugly.
"I'm now reduced to freighting produce," Silk said morosely. "I have 3 rickety wagons, and that's all that's left of the empire of Ambar of Kotu."
"Reverses come to us all," the Tolnedran said philosophically. "So, this is the famous Ambar of Kotu," the Murgo said, his harshly accented voice quite soft. He looked Silk up and down, his black eyes probing. "It was a fortunate chance that brought me out today. I am enriched by meeting so illustrious a man."
Silk bowed politely. "You're too kind, noble sir."
"I am Asherak of Rakoska," the Murgo introduced himself. He turned toward the Tolnedran. "We can put aside our discussions for a bit, Mingan. We will accrue much honor by assisting so great a merchant to begin recouping his losses."
"Oh, you're too kind, worthy Asherak," Silk said, bowing again. Geryon's mind was shrieking all kinds of warnings, but the Murgo's sharp eyes made it impossible for him to make the slightest gesture to Silk. He kept his face impassive and his eyes dull, even as his thoughts raced.
"I'd gladly help you, my friend, but I have no cargo in Dareen at the moment."
"I'm already committed from Dareen to Medalia," Silk said quickly. 3 wagon loads of Kerek iron, and I also have a contract to move furs from Muros to Kamar. It's the 50 leagues from Medalia to Muros that concerns me. Wagons traveling empty earn no profit."
"Medalia," Mingan frowned. "Let me examine my records. It seems to me that I do have something there."
He stepped out of the room.
"Your exploits are legendary in the kingdoms of the East, Ambar," Asherak of Rakoska said admiringly. "When last I left Tolmurgos, there was still a kingly price on your head."
Silk laughed easily. "Mine a misunderstanding, Asherak. I was merely investigating the extent of Tolnedran intelligence-gathering activities in your kingdom. I took some chances I probably should not have, and the Tolnedrans found out what I was up to.
The charges they leveled at me were fabrications. How did you manage to escape? He asked. The soldiers of King Taur Urgas nearly dismantled the kingdom searching for you.
I chanced to meet a toolish lady of a high station, Silk said. I managed to prevail upon her to smuggle me across the border into Mishrak Aktul.
Ah,
Ashrak said, smiling briefly.
Toolish ladies are notoriously easy to prevail upon.
Oh, but most demanding. They expect full repayment for any favors, Silk said. I found it more difficult to escape from her than I did from Tholmurgos.
Do you still perform such services for your government?
Asherak asked casually. They won't even talk to me, Silk said with a gloomy expression. Ambar the spice merchant is useful to them, but Ambar the poor wagoner is quite another thing.
Of course,
Asherak said, and his tone indicated that he obviously did not believe what he had been told. He glanced briefly, and without seeming interest, at Geryon, and Geryon felt a strange shock of recognition. Without knowing exactly how it was that he knew, he was instantly sure that Ashrak of Rakoska had known him for all of his life. There was a familiarity in that glance, a familiarity that had grown out of the dozen times or more that their eyes had met while Geryon was growing up, and Asherak, muffled always in a black cloak and astride a black horse, had stopped and watched, and then moved on. Geryon returned the gaze without expression, and the faintest hint of a smile flickered across Asherak's scarred face. Mingan returned to the room then.
We have some hams on a farm near Medallion. When do you expect to arrive in Muros?
20 days.
Mingan nodded. I'll give you a contract to move my hams to Muros. 7 silver nobles per wagon load.
2 Nedran nobles or Sundarian? Silk asked quickly.
This is Sindaria worthy Ambar.
And we are citizens of the world, noble merchant. Transactions between us have always been in Tonedran coin.
Mingan sighed. You were ever quick, worthy Ambar. Very well, tall Nedran nobles, because we are old friends, and I grieve for your misfortunes. Perhaps we will meet again, Ambar,
Asherak said. Perhaps, Silk said, and he and Geryon left the counting room.
Skinflint,
Silk muttered when they reached the street. Rate should have been 10, not 7. What about the Murgo? Geryon asked. Once again there was the familiar reluctance to reveal too much about the strange, unspoken link that had existed between him and the figure that now at least had a name. Silk shrugged. He knows I'm up to something, but he doesn't know exactly what. Just as I know that he is up to something. I've had dozens of meetings like that. Unless our purposes happen to collide, we won't interfere with each other. Asherak and I are both professionals. You're a very strange person, Silk. Silk winked at Geryon. Why were you and Mingan arguing about the coins? Tonedran coins are a bit purer. They are worth more. I see, said Geryon. The next morning they all mounted the wagons again and delivered their turnips to the warehouse of the Drasnian merchant. Then, their wagons rumbling emptily, they rolled out of Darin, bound toward the south. The rain had ceased, but the morning was overcast and blustery. On the hill outside town, Silk turned to Geryon, who rode beside him. Very well. Let's begin. He moved his fingers in front of Geryon's face. This means good morning. Chapter 8. After the first day, the wind blew itself out, and the pale autumn sun reappeared. Their route southward led them along the Darin River, a turbulent stream that rushed down from the mountains on its way to the Gulf of Cherek.
The country was hilly and timbered, but since the wagons were empty, their horses made good time. Geryon paid scant attention to the scenery as they trundled up the valley of the Darin. His attention was riveted almost totally on Silk's flickering fingers. "Don't shout," Silk instructed, as Geryon practiced. "Shout?" Geryon asked, puzzled. "Keep the gestures small. Don't exaggerate them. The idea is to make the whole business inconspicuous." "I'm only practicing. Better to break bad habits before they become too strong. And be careful not to mumble." "Mumble?" "Form each phrase precisely. Finish one before you go on to the next. Don't worry about speed. That comes with time." By the third day, their conversations were half in words and half in gestures, and Geryon was beginning to feel quite proud of himself. They pulled off the road into a grove of tall cedars that evening and formed up their usual half-circle with the wagons.
"How goes the instruction?"
Mr. Wolf asked as he climbed down. "It progresses. I expect it will go more rapidly when the boy outgrows his tendency to use baby talk." Geryon was crushed. Barak, who was also dismounting, laughed.
"I have often thought that the secret language might be useful to know," he said. "But fingers built to grip a sword are not nimble enough for it."
He held out his huge hand and shook his head. Jernick lifted his face and sniffed at the air.
"It's going to be cold tonight. We'll have frost before morning."
Barak also sniffed and then nodded.
"You're right, Jernick. We'll need a good fire tonight."
He reached into the wagon and lifted out his axe. "There are riders coming," Aunt Paul announced, still seated on the wagon. They all stopped talking and listened to the faint drumming sound on the road that they had just left.
"3 at least,"
Barak said grimly. He handed the axe to Jernick and reached back into the wagon for his sword. "4," Silk said. He stepped to his own wagon and took his own sword out from under the seat.
"We are far enough from the road,"
the wolf said.
"If we stay still, they will pass without seeing us."
"They won't hide us from Grollums," Aunt Paul said. "They won't be searching with their eyes." She made 2 quick gestures to Wolf, which Geryon did not recognize. "No," Wolf gestured back. "Let us instead." He also made an unrecognizable gesture. Aunt Paul looked at him for a moment and then nodded.
"All of you, stay quite still,"
the wolf instructed them. When he turned toward the road, his face was intent. Geryon held his breath. The sound of the galloping horses grew nearer. Then a strange thing happened. Though Geryon knew he should be fearful of the approaching riders and the threat they seemed to pose, a kind of dreamy lassitude fell over him. It was as if his mind had quite suddenly gone to sleep, leaving his body still standing there, watching incuriously the passage of those dark-mantled horsemen along the road. How long he stood so, he was not able to say. But when he roused from his half-dream, the riders were gone, and the sun had set. The sky to the east had grown purple with approaching evening, and there were tatters of sun-stained clouds along the western horizon. "Murgos," Aunt Paul said quite calmly. "And 1 Grollum." She started to climb down from the wagon. "There are many Murgos in Cinderia, great lady," Silk said, helping her down. "And on many different missions."
"Murgos are one thing," the wolf said grimly. "But Grollums are quite something else. I think it might be better if we moved off these well-traveled roads. Do you know a back way to Medelia?"
"Old friend," Silk replied modestly, "I know a back way to every place."
"Good. Let's move deeper into these woods. I'd prefer it if no chance gleam from our fire reached the road."
Gerion had seen the cloaked Murgos only briefly. There was no way to be sure if one of them had been that same Asherak he had finally met after all the years of knowing him only as a dark figure on a black horse. But somehow he was almost certain that Asherak had been among them. Asherak would follow him, would be there wherever he went. It was the kind of thing one could count on. Dernick had been right when he had spoken of frost. The ground was white with it the next morning, and the horses' breath steamed in the chill air as they set out. They moved along lanes and little-used tracks that were partially weed-choked. The going was slower than it might have been on the main road, but they all felt much safer. It took them 5 more days to reach the village of Winold, some 12 leagues to the north of Medelia. There, at Aunt Paul's insistence, they stopped overnight at a somewhat run-down inn. "I refuse to sleep on the ground again," she announced flatly. After they had eaten in the dingy common room of the inn, the men turned to their ale-pots, and Aunt Paul went up to her chamber, with instructions that hot water be brought to her for bathing. Gerion, however, made some pretext about checking the horses and went outside. It was not that he was in the habit of being deliberately deceptive, but it had occurred to him in the last day or so that he had not had a single moment alone since they had left Faldor's farm. He was not by nature a solitary boy, but he had begun to feel quite keenly the restriction of always being in the presence of his elders. The village of Winold was not a large one, and he explored it from one end to the other, in less than half an hour, loitering along its narrow cobblestone streets in the crispness of the early evening air. The windows of the houses glowed with golden candlelight, and Gerion suddenly felt a surge of homesickness. Then, at the next corner of the crooked street, in the brief light from the opening of a door, he saw a familiar figure. He could not be positive, but he shrank back against a rough stone wall anyway. The man at the corner turned in irritation toward the light, and Gerion caught the sudden white gleam from one of his eyes. It was Brill. The unkempt man moved quickly out of the light, obviously not wishing to be seen. Then he stopped. Gerion hugged the wall, watching Brill's impatient pacing at the corner. The wisest thing would have been to slip away and hurry back to the inn, but Gerion quickly dismissed the idea. He was safe enough here in the deep shadows beside the wall, and he was too caught up by curiosity to leave without seeing exactly what Brill was doing here. After what seemed hours, but was really only a few more minutes, another shadowy shape came scurrying down the street. The man was hooded, so it was impossible to see his face, but the outline of his form revealed a figure dressed in the tunic, hose, and calf-length boots of an ordinary Sindar. There was also, when he turned, the outline of a sword belted at his waist, and that was far from ordinary. While it was not precisely illegal for Sindars of the lower classes to bear arms, it was uncommon enough to attract a notice. Gerion tried to edge close enough to hear what Brill said to the man with the sword, but they spoke only briefly. There was a clink as some coins changed hands, and then the two separated. Brill moved quietly off around the corner, and the man with the sword walked up the narrow, crooked street toward the spot where Gerion stood. There was no place to hide, and as soon as the hooded man came close enough, he would be able to see Gerion. To turn and run would have been even more dangerous. Since there was no alternative, Gerion put on a bold front and marched determinedly toward the oncoming figure.
"Who's there?"
the hooded man demanded, his hand going to his sword hilt.
"Good evening, sir,"
Gerion said, deliberately forcing his voice up into the squeaky registers of a much younger boy.
"Cold night, isn't it?"
The hooded man grunted and seemed to relax. Gerion's legs quivered with the desire to run. He passed the man with the sword, and his back prickled as he felt that suspicious gaze following him. "Bye," the man said abruptly. Gerion stopped.
Yes, sir?
Do you live here?
Yes, sir,
Garyon lied, trying to keep his voice from trembling.
Is there a tavern hereabouts?
Garyon had just explored the town, and he spoke confidently.
Yes, sir. You go on up this street to the next corner and turn to your left. There are torches out front. You can't miss it.
My thanks,
the hooded man said shortly, and walked on up the narrow street.
Good night, sir,
Garyon called after him, made bold by the fact that the danger seemed past. The man did not answer, and Garyon marched on down to the corner, exhilarated by his brief encounter. Once he was around the corner, however, he dropped the guise of a simple village boy, and he ran. He was breathless by the time he reached the inn and burst into the smoky common room where Mr. Wolf and the others sat talking by the fire. At the last instant, realizing that to blurt out his news in the common room where others might overhear would be a mistake, he forced himself to walk calmly to where his friends sat. He stood in front of the fire as if warming himself, and spoke in a low tone.
I just saw Brill in the village.
Brill? Silk asked. Who is Brill? Wolf frowned. A farmhand, with too much Angarak gold in his purse to be entirely honest. Quickly, he told Silk and Barak about the adventure in Faldor's stable.
You should have killed him,
Barak rumbled.
This is not Karak,
Wolf said.
Sindars are touchy about casual killings.
He turned to Garyon.
Did he see you?
No, Garyon said. I saw him first and hid in the dark. He met another man and gave him some money, I think. The other man had a sword. Briefly, he described the whole incident.
This changes things. I think we'll leave here earlier in the morning than we had planned.
It wouldn't be hard to make Brill lose interest in us, Dernick said. I could probably find him and hit him on the head a few times.
Tempting, the wolf grinned, but I think it might be better just to slip out of town early tomorrow and leave him with no notion that we've ever been here. We don't really have time to start fighting with everyone that we run across.
I'd like a closer look at this sword-carrying Sindar, however, Silk said, rising. If it turns out that he's following us, I'd rather know what he looks like. I don't like being followed by strangers.
Discreetly, the wolf cautioned.
Silk laughed. Have you ever known me to be otherwise? Oh, this won't take long. Where did you say that tavern was, Garyon? Garyon gave him directions. Silk nodded, his eyes bright and his long nose twitching. He turned, went quickly across the smoky common room and out into the chill night.
I wonder, Barak considered, if we are being followed this closely. Wouldn't it be better to discard the wagons and this tiresome disguise, buy good horses, and simply make straight for Muros at a gallop?
Wolf shook his head.
I don't think. The Murgers are all that certain where we are. Brill could be here for some other dishonesty, and we would be foolish to start running from shadows. It is better just to move on quietly. Even if Brill's still working for the Murgos, I would rather just slip away and leave them all beating the bushes here in central Sandaria.
He stood up.
I am going to step upstairs and let Paul know what's happened.
He crossed the common room and mounted the stairs.
I still don't like it,
Barak muttered, his face dark. They sat quietly then, waiting for Silk's return. The fire popped and Garyon started slightly. It occurred to him as he waited that he had changed a great deal since they had left Faldor's farm. Everything had seemed simple then, with the world neatly divided into friends and enemies. In the short time since they had left, however, he had begun to perceive complexities that he had not imagined before. He had grown wary and distrustful, and listened more frequently to that interior voice that always advised caution, if not outright guile. He'd also learned not to accept anything at face value. Briefly, he regretted the loss of his former innocence, but the dry voice told him that such regret was childish. Then Mr. Wolf came back down the stairs and rejoined them. After about a half-hour, Silk returned. "Thoroughly disreputable-looking fellow," he said, standing in front of the fire. "My guess is that he's a common footpad."
"Brill seeking his natural level," the wolf observed. "If he's still working for the Murgos, he's probably hiring ruffians to watch for us. They'll be looking for 4 people on foot, however, rather than 6 in wagons. If we can get out of Winold early enough in the morning, I think we can elude them altogether."
"I think Dernick and I should stand watch tonight,"
Beric said. "Not a bad idea. Let's plan to leave about the 4th hour after midnight. I'd like to have 2 or 3 leagues of back roads between us and this place when the sun comes up."
Gurion scarcely slept that night. When he did, there were nightmares about a hooded man with a cruel sword chasing him endlessly down dark, narrow streets. When Barak woke them, Gurion's eyes felt sandy, and his head was thick from the exhausting night. Aunt Pole carefully drew the shutters in their chamber before lighting a single candle. "It's going to be colder now," she said, opening the large bundle she had him carry up from the wagons. She took out a pair of heavy woolen hose and winter boots lined with lamb's wool. "Put these on," she instructed Gurion, "and your heavy cloak." "I'm not a baby any more, Aunt Pole," Gurion said. "Do you enjoy being cold?" "Well, no, but—" He stopped, unable to think of any words to explain how he felt. He began to dress. He could hear the faint murmuring of the others talking softly in the adjoining chamber in that curious hushed tone that men always assume when they rise before the sun. "We are ready, Mistress Pole," Silk's voice came through the doorway. "Let's leave, then," she said, drawing up the hood of her cloak. The moon had risen late that night and shone brightly on the frost-silvered stones outside of the inn. Dernick had hitched the horses to the wagons and had led them out of the stable.
"We'll lead the horses out to the road," the wolf said very quietly. "I do not see any need for rousing the villagers as we pass."
Silk again took the lead, and they moved slowly out of the vineyard. The fields beyond the village were white with frost, and the pale, smoky-looking moonlight seemed to have leached all of the color from them.
"As soon as we are well out of earshot," Wolf said, climbing up into his wagon, "let's put some significant distance between us and this place. The wagons are empty, and a little run won't hurt the horses."
"Truly," Silk agreed. They all mounted their wagons and set off at a walk. The stars glittered overhead in the crisp, cold sky. The fields were very white in the moonlight, and the clumps of trees back from the road were very dark. Just as they went over the first hilltop, Gurion looked back at the dark cluster of houses in the valley behind. A single flicker of light came from a window somewhere, a lone golden pinpoint that appeared, then vanished. "Someone's awake back there. I just saw a light," he told Silk.
"Some early riser, perhaps," Silk suggested.
But then again, perhaps not. He shook the reins slightly, and the horses increased their pace. He shook them again, and they began to trot.
"Hang on, boy,"
he instructed, reaching forward and slapping the reins down smartly on the rumps of the horses. The wagon bounced and clattered fearfully behind the running team, and the bitterly chill air rushed at Gurion's face as he clung to the wagon seat. At full gallop, the 3 wagons plunged down into the next valley, rushing between the frost-white fields in the bright moonlight, leaving the village and its single light far behind. By the time the sun rose, they had covered a good 4 leagues, and Silk reined in his steaming horses. Geryon felt battered and sore from the wild ride over the iron-hard roads, and was glad for the chance to rest. Silk handed him the reins and jumped down from the wagon. He walked back and spoke briefly to Mr. Wolf and Aunt Pole, then returned to the wagon. "We turn off at that lane just ahead," he told Geryon, as he massaged his fingers. Geryon offered him the reins. "You drive. My hands are frozen stiff. Just let the horses walk." Geryon clucked at the horses and shook the reins slightly. Obediently, the team started out again. "The lane circles around to the back of that hill," Silk said, pointing with his chin, since his hands were tucked inside his tunic. "On the far side, there's a copse of fir trees. We'll stop there to rest the horses." "Do you think we're being followed?" "This would be a good time to find out." They rounded the hill and drove on down to where the dark firs bordered the road. Then Geryon turned the horses and moved in under the shadowy trees. "This will do fine," Silk said, getting down. "Come along." "Where are we going?" "I want to have a look at that road behind us," Silk said. "We'll go up the trees to the top of the hill and see if our back trail has attracted any interest." And he started up the hill, moving quite rapidly but making absolutely no sound as he went. Geryon floundered along behind him, his feet cracking the dead twigs underfoot embarrassingly, until he began to catch the secret of it. Silk nodded approvingly once, but said nothing. The trees ended just at the crest of the hill, and Silk stopped there. The valley below, with a dark road passing through it, was empty except for 2 deer who had come out of the woods on the far side to graze in the frosty grass. "We'll wait a minute," Silk said. "If Brill and his hireling are following, they should not be far behind." He sat on a stump and watched the empty valley. After a while, a cart moved slowly along the road toward Winold. It looked tiny in the distance, and its pace along the scar of the road seemed very slow. The sun rose a bit higher, and they squinted into its full morning brightness. "Silk?" Geryon said, finally, in a hesitant tone. "Oh, yes, Geryon." "What is this all about?" It was a bold question to ask, but Geryon felt he knew Silk well enough to ask it. "All what?" "What we're doing. I've heard a few things and guessed a few more, but it doesn't really make any sense to me." "And just what have you guessed, Geryon?" Silk asked, his small eyes very bright in his unshaven face. "Something's been stolen, something very important, and Mr. Wolf and Aunt Paul and the rest of us are trying to get it back." "All right," Silk said. "That much is true." "Mr. Wolf and Aunt Paul are not at all what they seem to be," Geryon went on. "No?" "No, they aren't. I think they can do things that other people can't do," Geryon said, struggling with his words. "Mr. Wolf can follow this thing, whatever it is, without seeing it, and last week in those woods when the Murgos passed, they did something. I don't even know how to describe it, but it was almost as if they reached out and put my mind to sleep. How did they do that? And why?" Silk chuckled. "You are a very observant lad." Then his tone became more serious. "We're living in a momentous time, Geryon. The events of thousands of years and more, all focused on these very days. The world, I'm told, is like that. Centuries pass when nothing happens, and then, in a few short years, events of such tremendous importance take place that the world is never the same again. I think that if I had my choice, I'd prefer one of those quiet centuries." "Oh, no," Silk said, his lips drawing back in a ferret-like grin. "Now's the time to be alive, to see it all happening, to be a part of it. That makes the blood race, and each breath is an adventure." Geryon let that pass.
What is this thing we're following?
It is best if you don't even know its name, Silk told him seriously, or the name of the one who stole it. There are people trying to stop us, and what you don't know, you cannot reveal.
I'm not in the habit of talking to Murgos, Garion said stiffly.
It is not necessary to talk to them, Silk told him. There are some among them who can reach out and pick the thoughts right out of your mind.
That's not possible.
Who's to say what's possible and what isn't? Silk asked him. And Garion remembered a conversation he had once with Mr. Wolf about the possible and the impossible. Silk sat on the stump in the newly risen sun, looking thoughtfully down into the still, shadowy valley, an ordinary-looking little man in ordinary-looking tunic and hose and a rough brown shoulder cape with its hood turned up over his head. You were raised as a Sindar, Garion, and Sindars are solid, practical men with little patience for such things as sorcery and magic, and other things that can't be seen or touched. Your friend Turnek is a perfect Sindar. He can mend a shoe or fix a broken wheel or dose a sick horse, but I doubt that he could bring himself to believe in the tiniest bit of magic.
I am a Sindar,
Garion objected. The hint implicit in Silk's observation struck at the very center of his sense of his own identity. Silk turned and looked at him closely. No, you aren't. I know a Sindar when I see one, just as I can recognize the difference between an Errand and a Tolnedron, or a Kerek and an Algar. There's a certain set of the head, a certain look about the eyes of Sindars that you don't have. You are not a Sindar.
Well, what am I then?
Garion challenged.
I don't know,
Silk said, with a puzzled frown. And that's very unusual, since I've been trained to know what people are. It may come to me in time, though.
Is Aunt Paul a Sindar?
Of course not, Silk laughed.
Well, that explains it then. I'm probably the same thing she is.
Silk looked sharply at him.
She's my father's sister, after all, Garion said. At first I thought it was my mother she was related to, but that was wrong. It was my father. I know that now.
That's impossible, Silk said flatly.
Impossible?
Absolutely out of the question. The whole notion's unthinkable.
This ends Disc 4. Please change to Disc 5.